for the parents listening, they maybe have a late developer. Are
Mhm.
they completely at a disadvantage, or are there some things that they can really work on during this time as other girls are growing faster and
Mhm.
running faster? What can late developers focus on and kinda use to their advantage?
Yeah, well, certainly they need to focus upon things such as technical, tactical abilities and skills because they're never going to win a physical battle. They just don't have those attributes at that point of time. But what we tend to find in many of the academies is that those individuals who are stuck within the academy, who manage to be retained, are generally technically, tactically, or psychologically superior to many of those early developers. It may be down to the bigger challenges that they face, but to some extent, they have to possess those kind of abilities just to survive and compete. And of course, the great thing is that eventually those physical differences will take place when they will sort of be negated when the individual does go through that growth spurt. And often it's the late developer who, in the long term, can actually be the most successful. And we've seen great examples of this through some of the futures programs in Belgium, for example, where they actually had specific national team programs for late developers who, at the age of, say, under 16s, might only be biologically 14 or 13, but, were talented football players. And while they couldn't compete in the under 16s national squad, they knew that eventually, when they grew and developed, they would come through and be successful. So players such as Courtois, De Bruyne, Dries Mertens all have benefited from those programs. Classic late developers who maybe weren't the best athlete at maybe 12, 13, but eventually they grew and eventually developed, and that's when their true abilities showed up. But it was only about 18 or 19 down the line. So for the late developers, success is there, but it's just going to take you a wee bit more time and perseverance to get to.
I think that gives a lot of parents hope listening because I think
Hmm.
it's easy for them to get caught up in the now and instant gratification, like, "Why aren't they growing and why are they slower
Yes.
than everyone else?" But that's so amazing for them to really
Hmm.
zoom out and look at that bigger long-term picture. Now, in terms of injury risk during this
Hmm.
time, what are some things that you are finding in early versus late developers? Is one
Yeah.
group at a higher risk than others, or does it really just depend?
Yeah, when it comes down to maturation, it's not so much whether you're early, on time, or late, which appears to be the problem. The biggest factor is probably your maturity status, which is where you are in the maturity journey. And what we tend to find is that when we go through that growth spurt, for most girls, that's going to be maybe around the ages of, say, 10 or 11 years that will start to take off on that growth spurt. For some late developers, it might be much later, maybe 14 or 15. But when they start to go through that growth spurt, we all of a sudden have rapid growth of the skeleton. And at the certain sites, such as the epiphyseal sites, where the tendons are going to be attached to the bone, or we've looked at the growth plate, because of that rapid growth, the sites there tend to be a little bit more fragile. So if you overload a child at that point of time, that's when we start to get apophyseal injuries, such as severs or Osgood-Schlatters tending to present itself. But also with a more fragile growth plate, there's increased likelihood for fractures if you're overloading a child at that point. And it's fascinating because when we look at the data, and keep in mind most of this data is coming from boys' academies, what we see is a perfect spike of injuries that mimics the growth spurt in terms of its prevalence. And the way the growth spurt works is interesting. So we don't just all grow at one time in every part of the body. It's the feet that first start to grow, then it's the lower legs that grow, and eventually it's the torso and the pelvis that will be growing. So it takes a little bit of time for that to occur. And so we see a pattern of injury such as the severs presenting at the start of the growth spurt. So that's in the back of the heel. It'll then be the Osgood-Schlatters in the knees, which is the next sort of growth-related injury to occur. And then later on at the back end of the growth spurt is where we get sort of lower back pain, such as PARS, or we might get some pelvic or groin-related issues. Um, the key thing, I guess, is recognizing when a boy or a girl is going through that phase and just being a little bit more aware of some of the symptoms associated with those injuries. Because not every boy or girl will get injured during the phases, but we do see an increase in prevalence of injury. And if you do see that symptomology coming to the fore, well, it's a point of time where you might ease off or you might adapt that training program. So maybe you're moving on to softer surfaces, so more training programs or sessions run on grass. For some of the clubs that we work with, they'll have their what they call a growers club, which is all those boys or girls who are identified in the middle of the growth spurt. They'll actually take some of their sessions off from regular football training They'll take them into the gym, they'll have nice soft padded floors, they'll be doing a lot of work on sort of balanced disruptive surfaces such as crash mats where they might be doing ball juggling. They'll do a lot of work in core strength, balance, coordination, all the kind of things a child needs at that point of time. And often they're doing those activities in sock feet or in bare feet as well. So it's kind of hard to do high intensity. And what we found from those programs in the Premier League academies is those clubs who are running these types of programs, they're reducing their injuries by about 72% in terms of incidence, and the days lost to injuries have been reduced by about 90%, which is great because we're keeping the kids healthy during those phases. And if you pick up, say, severs, you're more likely to get Osgood Schlatters. If you get Osgood Schlatters, you're more likely to pick up the PARs. And so reducing the chances of those injuries keeps the kids healthy at that point of time. And sure, yes, they may step out of maybe one or two training programs, but they're actually still training. They're just training smarter at that point. And I know from some of the wonderful work that you currently do with your young athletes, you really focus upon when they're going through those growth spurts, giving them the strength and the balance and the coordinative type of exercises to allow them to adapt and become efficient and effective movers. And if you can do that, well, you can keep them healthy through that phase. It reduces the chances of future injury and it also keeps them playing, which is important. In fact, when we ran those programs at Bournemouth Academy, I think even when we took into account the amount of days we'd taken away from the athletes, coaches ended up getting about 125 extra training days with those boys throughout the academy season because they were healthy.